Good morning, Dr. Brad.
Hello, Curt. How are we doing today?
A very dirty coffee cup that needs some love. Um, you were just Brad and I were just talking. It's Saturday, January 21st. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Listen, so Brad and I were just talking, and I brought up something that Martin said. I sort of like that Martin is the really pessimistic guy, so I don't have to be. You know, but anyway, he said that this goes back to Brad said something along the lines of, well, you have to be well understood and well read and before you get your retribution or something along those lines.
Something like that.
Something like that. And Martin had said, well, he's Carlylean in that he thinks the meaning of justice is revenge. And of course, I'm in the camp of justice is either prevention of a reconciliation of differences, right? I mean, disputes. So I mean, you can have this whole spectrum of me thinking the positive side of justice, Martin thinking the negative side, and you thinking the punishment side of it. And I just thought that was ironic that the three of us had covered the spectrum of what we consider justice, from my prevention to Martin's retribution to yours, Martin's retaliation to your not too terribly concerned about reconciliation.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I fear this that it probably goes to past, present, future.
yes.
And it's like the issue is I kind of look at it like this, because I said it was about knowledge, and it's like, so I'm studying this One Nation Under Blackmail, and I'm like reading that one, and it's like it's knowledge, but I come to the conclusion that knowledge without action is impotent.
Correct. Which is a very old and very ancient observation that all of us must eventually come to.
And that, but the action without knowledge is ignorant.
Ignorant, yes.
So it's like that. So it's trying to resolve the ignorance prior to becoming a knowledgeable actor.
Yes.
And that's all. Now, I want to introduce the episode by number. It's 2301, number 10, I believe, but it might be 11. Depends on how you numbered the staff meeting.
I don't think we have. Did we have a staff meeting? I have a very poor recollection of the past week for some reason. We had a brief staff meeting on Thursday. Yes. And it was about scheduling a chapter by chapter review of Luke's book and how we would handle the process.
Very good. It was a very interesting interview. Edward Dowd, who wrote a recent book on excess deaths associated with mRNA therapies. And it was interesting because it dovetailed with a conversation that James Lindsay was having on Twitter that was highlighted in the Good Dudes feed, which is related to the damage done to the economy by the powers that be, of a nature that is have lasting impact due to loss of capacities of the economy to continue to perform the same systematic functions that it has been performing before it got shut off. Or had been performing. And it's like, so Dowd he relayed a story. He had a Audi in Hawaii. They had a fender bender. And the fender bender damaged one quarter panel and the radiator. And he took it to the shop, and the shop said, yeah, we can't fix that for months because we can't get parts.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually he gets a call from the insurance company. The insurance company says, we're going to pay you Blue Book plus $4,000 to sell us the car, even though it's not totaled. So they're paying more than the value of the car to take possession of the car so he can just go buy a new one. Because there's no car parts available. They scrapped the car out and sold it for parts at above market value because the supply chain is that disrupted. I'm like, it's unbelievable.
Yep.
When the issue is you can have all the money in the world and it doesn't do anything for you because there's no supply.
There's no supply. Yep.
Which is, it's just beyond stunning. And I'm like, I think that we're heading into this is what's the shape of things to come is.
Yes, of course. That's the whole point of the dissolution of the international system of trade that Americans have built up in the post-war period in order to lift everybody out of poverty. But they lifted everybody out of poverty by reducing transport and trade costs, increasing labor arbitrage, decreasing prices, but at the cost of distributing production very, very widely in these incredibly complex trade networks. It's a hugely efficient process. But if you reverse that hugely efficient process, now you've got to go back to Elon Musk and not Gerald Ford, and Ford. What's his name? Ford. Henry Ford.
Henry.
So in Musk's world, he just dumps resources in one end, and an electric car comes out the other. Well, that's how Ford used to make cars, right?
Yeah.
But over time, what happens is you try to save a nickel by having somebody carry the employees and somebody else carry the inventory and whatever, until you got this highly efficient system where risks, unemployment, and carrying costs are distributed across vast networks that can engage in trade between parties to stay busy instead of trade within a monopoly to stay busy. Well, that's all well and good as long as you have mommy, daddy America basically organizing and policing the system of world trade, so that even very little countries that previously would have been impoverished can participate as if they were vast empires. But you take that shit away, and all of a sudden you're back to, okay, we got to have everything from the iron on up in order to manufacture something autarkically, because you can't. And so who does that leave? That leaves America in the best position, because we have just this enormous fucking territory with this wide distribution of resources. We're on an island, so it's pretty defensible. We have more resources up north with a tiny population, and we have infinite labor down south with a large population, right? And so we're in this sort of somewhat ideal population, but the rest of the world is frankly fucked in the backside with a ground glass bottle. I mean, it's just freaking horrible. And of course, people are all well and good Europeans are all well and good to virtue signal they're better when they're actually just free riding, and the rest of the world is all well and good bitching about American intervention and whatever, but all they're trying to do is create that system of trade, right? So that everybody benefits. And you say, well, we make mistakes doing it. Yeah, you're right. We make mistakes doing it. We made mistakes building the Indo-European expansion, the Greco-Roman empires, and the age of sail. But together, those dragged mankind out of the Malthusian trap. And it's the only people that ever dragged mankind out of the Malthusian trap. So I'm like, well, we all bitch about things that are imperfect without realizing that they are actually as perfect as can be. So the world is, you're right when you say the world looks like that's gonna be common, because it fucking is. As it's gonna be, it's like we were pretty integrated in world trade before the world wars, and then we had to reconstruct everything after. We had to do it so that it didn't require empires to protect trade routes, possession of trade routes. So it's going to get fucked. And, and frankly, I think the world deserves it. I think we deserved a little bit for the fact that we went out and we let the Jewish mafia do what their job was. Then we went out and sold democracy instead of rule of law. And we sold democracy instead of we're providing discounts on trade that are going to raise us out of ignorance and poverty. So, we get it we get it for liberals on one end, in other words, people who promoted democracy, instead of conservatives who promoted economics. And we get it for letting the Jewish mafia come in and create their left-wing propaganda on the top of this empire in order to, in other words, we create this trade empire we've created, and then to basically foster hatred against it with their woke and bullshit, right? So I'm not into the beating on gays, but I mean it is pretty revolting to the rest of the world that we aren't putting family first and suppressing non-family behavior. So, I don't know.
That was an interesting little rant. That was more than I expected.
Well, it's just, it's a matter. Why are people that ignorant when it's that obvious? I mean,
I will say that arc that you drew there was not quite that obvious.
Well, it was obvious to its creators, right? They said what they were going to do. They sat down at a big table. We use the terms that refer to that sitting down at that big table all the time, right? We talk about human rights all the time. We don't talk about why that was all created. It was all created to prevent another world war by making us good Smithian partners in the world, and in turn raising us out of ignorance and poverty, so that we had little reason to war. But we forget that burns out, that hurts, ideologies like the Chinese imperial, because they want to preserve the Chinese empire's scale when China does need to break up into a federation in order for that value to occur. And the same thing for Russia. Russia, instead of joining into the international trade system, they want to be an empire where they don't. And why? Because Russia and China are low trust societies. It's the same problem in the Middle East. Why don't they want to? Why does Iran and why does Turkey want to create a new caliphate? It's because they're low trust societies, right? Whereas you don't see the monarchies trying to create a caliphate. You don't see Egypt or North Africa trying to create a caliphate. So what you see is the concentration of low trust societies producing desire for power, because they need power. They feel they need power to compensate with authority for the lack of trust. And that's the whole purpose of the Jewish mafia's undermining, is to destroy trust in a high trust society, generating demand for authority, which only credentialists can supply.
Okay.
And it's the opposite of what we do, which is we prohibit authority everywhere we find it, using the rule of law, so that we maximize individual agency, individual responsibility, and the cost and benefits that go with it, creating a virtuous cycle of continuous progress, which means continuous innovation by the continuous capture of more energy, by the reduction of prices therefrom, and therefore the ability for individuals to have choices. We call it consumption, but it's just choice. And this all very, very simple It's just physics. I mean, it's not miraculous, right? If you have an electrical circuit diagram or a water diagram, a water flow, resistance is basically the problem you're trying to overcome, right? I mean, you're trying to overcome resistance. Well, I mean, the more trust you have, the lower resistance you have, the more current you have, whether it's electrical, whether it's cooperative or fluidic or electrical. It doesn't make any fucking difference, right? We could refer to that as gravity doing the same thing inside the quantum background. So friction is a problem. The only reason we can't travel faster than light is because the resistance of traveling through the quantum background essentially reaches a point where there is no energy available enough to move that much of the quantum background aside without this crazy idea of a warp bubble, which would require phenomenal amounts of energy. So I mean, it's just there's the idea that we are different from nature, all right, is this really odd invention that we can cheat nature. We can use it, but we can't cheat it. And this is fucking everywhere. So we're being
it's a supernatural claim.
Yeah, exactly. So we're being undermined from within. We're being replaced, and it's working. And our civilization is being destroyed from within by a bunch of people who are trying to generate disharmony by the false promise that a greater harmony is possible. It's not. And it can only be, and that greater harmony can only achieve by authority, an authority that they desire to, because they whether they believe or not that they could impose this new efficiency, which is impossible. So it's a supernatural claim in the sense that it's unscientific. In other words, it's not possible. It's just not an occult claim, right? There's a difference between a supernatural.
What's the difference? Yeah.
Well, supernatural claim is you're violating the laws of nature. An occult claim is you've moved from violating those laws by whatever means into that there is some higher power or mind or anthropomorphic force. So that's the difference between supernatural, which is beyond nature, and occult, which is that you attributed some anthropomorphic agency to it. So we mix these terms up to quite often, but really that's all it means is if Hercules was really that strong, he would have been supernatural, right? Beyond nature. But in order for spirits to exist, you need occultism. You need anthropomorphism.
Okay.
Thank you by the way, for giving me that chance, because I really don't. I don't think I disambiguate that very often. It's probably one of those things that's very useful for understanding what kind of claim is being made.
That's right. That's right.
A pseudoscientific and a magical, right? Those are supernatural claims.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And idealism or Platonism is again a supernatural claim. It's claiming that something exists independent, not an order or forms exist independent of minds. And then an occult frame is that it exists because a mind exists that's independent of nature. So you have these, this escalation path of from sophistry to magic to pseudoscience to occultism, and it's just basically this series of escalations from the pretense that you have special knowledge to the pretense that there is there's special powers
operating in the world.
To their special individual powers operating in the world. And it's once you realize that's just a replication of our sense perceptions, right? Our physical, our verbal, and our imaginary. You realize it's all fucking. It's just anthropomorphism. I mean, it's just the degree to it is something that I've been thinking about lately. Is the degree to which anthropomorphism still exists everywhere is actually bothering me. I've begun to see that most of these problems that I worry about in logic are actually they're actually derivation Pareto would call derivations. They're leftover smoke of anthropomorphism. You know what I mean?
Okay. So
Leftover
like a residue. Like
that's actually,
unconscious
thank you. He
residue.
uses the word residues and derivations. Thank you. He uses the word residues. Thank you. Residues and derivations. He said the leftover residues of anthropomorphism, and it's natural that we would do that, right? I mean, because the reason we have consciousness is because we're social creatures, so we can read the mind of others, right? We can anticipate, we predict the mind of others, right? And then by predicting their reaction, we can then judge what our action should be in order to cooperate. Well, if that's just anthropomorphism, right? You don't need to anthropomorphism if you're not going to socially cooperate. You don't even need to be conscious, right? You only need to be conscious if that's your frame, because that's what consciousness means. It's the ability to interact socially. But so if you say, well, of course, if we develop that as our primary faculty and it's our primary evolutionary advantage, we would, of course, shit all over the world with anthropomorphism, right? And we do attribute anthropomorphism. I mean, it's just fucking obvious, right? But
well, maybe not. It's kind of like it's cryptic a little bit, because it's like it's fishes in water problem. It's like it's almost impossible for the anthropomorphizing agent to recognize that he's anthropomorphizing all over.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so obvious, but you realize so much of all, in other words, if you look at our cognitive errors, right? The things that I find in the errors in human logic and reasoning, it's anthropomorphism is as universal as responsibility evasion.
That sounds right.
And so
probably more so.
Well, it's more so because it's harder to conceive of, right? I mean, it's harder to even conceive of, whereas responsibility we can observe, right? You're fucking doing it. But, you look at another person, they're anthropomorphizing like you are, and you're like, well, of course, right?
That's what we do.
That's what we do. I mean, it's just so obvious. Yeah, when you study if you try to figure out the genealogy of religion, which starts out with death, right? I mean, and why is that? Well, because you're fucking imagining this person's mind, right? You don't want to see that person torn apart, right, by animals and whatever. You want to bury them so they're safe, right? You want to bring them home and make them safe, but you don't want it to pollute you. So this ritual of is really just an altruistic service issue, which is defense, right? And it's communal defense. So you realize all religion evolves out of this one thing, but it makes total sense that all of a sudden you're doing that, and then you've got spirits, and because something happens over there, it's another person, another animal, another whatever. But so what? We're anthropomorphic. The wind there must be somebody blowing the wind around, right? Because it's the only causality we can understand. Right. So
there's an agent there.
There's an agent there. But then you get into things that are very abstract today, and I work through the causality of this particular failure of reasoning, and I'm like, oh, it's fucking anthropomorphism again. It's like everywhere. It's like we can't even. It's so exasperating. It's like, I don't know. As you know, I get a lot of my insights from comparing mathematics, computation, and cooperation, right? I try ternary sort of relations. And so whenever I'm looking at mathematics, computation, cooperation, and the intersecting thing is continuous, recursive, and disambiguation, which is basically language. I'm looking at these things and I'm like, well, it's just stupid fucking anthropomorphism again. We're just trying to attribute to mathematics that which isn't there. Now you would say, well, why how could you say a thing like that, Curt? Because math is supposed to be this incredibly pure thing, but I'm like, you're looking for wisdom in a thing that isn't there. It's just a pattern that plays out through because of scale independence. And so what you're trying to find is what this math knows, like it's some person. It doesn't know fucking anything, right? It's like if you say this is a rule and it's scale independent, no matter how far you look out, it's and what scale you look at it, it's going to be the same fucking rule at whatever scale, right? Now, but we tend to believe it or not that with the psychological process between a whole bunch of these errors turns out to being anthropomorphism. Why? And this is kind of the interesting end of the chain, is that because in the end we're not reasoning, because in the end what we consider logic is still intuition.
That's right. It's free association.
Right. It's still an intuition. Our intuition isn't wrong a lot because that's prediction. Right. But because prediction is basically the ability to identify logical consistencies, right? We call them logical, but they're just consistencies, right? And if without consistencies, you can't predict. Without prediction, you can't think. And without thinking, you can't be, life. And,
Oh, yeah.
So we get into this really interesting problem of people's, it's like the problem of men and women or Jews and Europeans, and I'm my two basic quadrants, which is the individual level, right, and the collective levels, right, which are the two interesting ones, the male and the female, which is the cause of both. And it's like they just think that way because in the end, intuition is what's solving the problem, not reason. No, not calculation.
We don't like to believe that, though, right?
Right. We don't want to believe it. But I mean, if I asked this question yesterday because I got a lot of responses out of it. And but why is it that the Jewish intellectuals have this pseudo pattern of pseudoscience? Well, I mean, I just finished saying that there's still anthropomorphism being laundered from European thought.
Yes.
Why wouldn't there be anthropomorphism still underlaundered from the Jewish thought?
Right.
Well, what's the difference between male and female thought? A bias to the empathic or the systemic or the external? Well, of course, Jewish thought hasn't been laundered of female intuition. I mean, it's a stupid fucking question. Now we think, I think of it as lying, right? I mean, right, but because I think of women as lying, because lying is a tort of avoiding responsibility or for due diligence.
Yep.
But that's a very male thing to think, and it's a very European male thing to think, right? I mean, it's like because we've just laundered more of that shit than anybody else has, right? I mean, because we've been doing it longer. So of course that. But why should I think that somebody's going to have who has a cognitively feminine bias isn't going to see the very fringe of some logical consistency being approval rather than correspondence?
Approval corresponds to
reality versus approval.
No, but I'm thinking of this from the feminine point of view, which is that approval is the logical consistency of the empathic mind.
Yes, exactly. And when you realize it, you say, well, that's fucking insane.
All right, it's right. Reality by
it's absolutely insane. And we wonder why we think women are crazy. It's cause. So people, I get these guys that come along, they're sort of like us, right? They follow us for a couple of years and they sort of get to this point where they begin to see it all like this at this level. And the clown world aspect of being human comes a little bit into focus. And for some of us, it's just aggravating, certainly has been. But for some of us, it's fucking ridiculous. It's actually funny. It's kind of funny. And so you have to choose whether you're going to be address the problem with compassion and still solve it, or address the problem with anger and try to solve it. And I think it's like life is a tragedy or a comedy.
Yes.
Right? I just choose that I'm going to try to solve it compassionately, although I really prefer skull pyramids. I'm going to try to solve it compassionately if I can, because it's
less work.
It's less work. I mean, skull pyramids are fun and all, but it's a lot of work. So this arc we just covered, I mean, it's quite profound, really. And you never know who's going to understand it, but
you wonder.
But once you but it's logical. Well, the problem is logical for highly intelligent, highly intelligent, highly systematizing, general knowledge acquiring, autodidactic, right, with low agreeableness, right? I mean, that's because your logic doesn't vary from reality very much. Right. I mean, right. I mean, that it just doesn't. That's what autists do, right? We just don't, our logic doesn't vary, or really the male mind just in general doesn't vary from reality much, right? Unless you feel out of power. In other words, that's where a lot of conspiracy thinking and stuff comes from, is you feel out of control in the world. You feel it's like the male version of the oppression narrative. But for most males who have any sense of control of their life, their ascertainment of the world is increasingly correct, right, over time. That's why, you find these black guys that were like troublemakers in their teens, but they're like 70 years old, and they're just as logical as the same 70-year-old white man, maybe more so, because they saw more adversity in the world. Yeah. Right. So, but why would we expect women and Jews who are cognitively feminine to have the same reasoning? No, they see their sense of gravity is approval. Right. And why? Because approval means you have less responsibility for conflict resolution. Or it's that they can do the opposite, which is they war by creating disapproval, by undermining, which says your correspondence with reality is oppression. Does this sound real ridiculous when you say? Does this sound ridiculous? Yes. When you say it like that, it's like your male correspondence with reality is oppression to my sense of approval, right? Want of approval.
Don't approve of it.
It doesn't matter if you approve of reality or not. We don't get a fucking choice. What you really mean is you disapprove of reality, so you want us to solve the fucking problem of the space between the difference between reality and what you approve of. Okay, right? That's actually demand from males.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's like you said solve the problem, which is to say to do the work necessary to make up the difference for the divergence
between
my superstition from reality.
Yes.
Which is like that some cost cannot be borne.
Yes. So we call women magical thinkers. We're not fucking kidding. They're literally magical thinkers.
So I was working on this problem over the week, and it's interesting. I came to the conclusion that life is just too damned easy.
Too damn what?
That life is just too damned easy, and it's like it comes down to central heating and air conditioning. And it's like this: as soon as the men make houses that don't only have wood stoves, that require shoveling coal or chopping wood, the women will understand the value of a man. It's like the men have outsourced themselves by making things so easy.
I actually posted that this morning. It's from a book I'm reading by some academic whose name is not material because I've forgotten it. But he's going through this, and he's trying to make an accessible version of this problem, which is that life's just too easy. That's the problem, right? Life's too easy, and so there's no negative feedback loop, right? And so the OODA loop that we have generally operated under as ourselves is more affected than the non-OODA loop, or the basically stasis loop, which is what most of humanity follows, right? They don't try to outwit time; they try to work within time, and so. This whole thing is the more easy you make it, right, the worse, the more divergence from reality becomes permissible. Does that make sense?
Yes, because it doesn't require as much work.
Right.
to
And so
maintain stasis.
so this is goes with criminal. So this goes back to my full basic project and our basic insight, which is as a human technology of any kind, both good and bad, truth and lying,
Right.
practical thinking and magical thinking. As all technologies advance, we must continue the advancement of our policing of display, word, and deed, and unfortunately, maybe thinking word, display, word, and deed. So that the delta between our policing and people's innovation of stupid shit is is not sufficient to put the entire structure at risk. And so what's happened is we didn't police the female side of immorality, which is what
Yes.
my work tries to do. We didn't police the female means of antisocial, anti-political, seditious, and treasonous behavior because of their desire for magical thinking, because they believe they're oppressed rather than being domesticated, and believing they should have power rather than their power is the generating demand for which we exchange sex between the sexes, which is really what goes on. That's how we solve this problem of calculation. So they believe they should have power instead, right? And they're wealthy enough and we've given them freedom enough without policing them enough that they can get away with expanding the delta between reality and their magical thinking enough to create a dissonance because of the wealth that's available to use it to themselves to undermine the structure that makes the luxury of their folly possible. Did I make that? That might have been
well said.
Okay.
That was well said. But it's interesting because it's like you called it policing, and I'm like, it's like
Parenting.
it's
Paternalism. It's paternal. They don't want that paternalism because it's policing.
It's yeah, it's hygiene, like
Yes.
mental and action and social hygiene.
Hygiene. Yes, that's really what it is.
And it is paternalism is the patriarchy, right?
Right. And it's like I always throw back against, I don't want to hear any of this bullshit because it's just, well, I mean, in as they mean it, it's nonsense, but as we mean it as well, it's just fucking physics, right? Sorry. Then it's true because there need to be adults in the room, and the purpose of the female mind's failure to adult is so that she can distribute her emotions across children, because those impulses are cheaper than the reason and more accurate than the reason necessary to interpret the behavior of rugrats. So she has to maintain immaturity in order to maintain emotional sensitivity, in order to maintain emotional prediction. If you had all these women around look like men, you know what women wouldn't have any kids like they're not having today because they're masculine. Well, duh. You get a masculine, you become rational. You become rational, make cost-benefit associations. Make cost-benefit associations say, well, I'm not going to have any fucking kids. And humanity goes up. So, I mean, this whole thing is just a really obvious correction, failure of error correction of the females, because the female lag, our institutional lag in policing female behavior as thoroughly as we've policed male behavior. So the display, word, and deed. And so we think we're being Christian and forgiving and opportunistic and fulfillment and letting each snowflake blossom into its natural wonderfulness, whatever. But no, you're just letting the dogs go wild. I mean, return to the feral state.
Going through the failure of the negative feedback loop, right?
Yes.
So what's
we're the feedback loop, which is basically limit. Right. You say this is that's enough, right?
Well, I'd say that it's interesting and like operating at the scale that we're talking about, which is cooperation across vast scales, Western civilization. The scale of the operation is so large that the recognition of the failure of the negative feedback loop is what will instigate the limit to be reimposed.
Correct. Again, that's why we want families because they're small. That's a political unit. You want small polities because they're small, right? You want federations, not empires. So what experiment small, fail small, right? But experiment lots. The pyramid of successes, in other words, the few successes that percolate can be imitated. But the minute you get very large, or in this case, as the men have criticized, women can now marry the state, right? And as a proxy through men, the way men could enslave other men as a proxy for labor, right? It's the same fucking thing. So we've, the state made possible enslavement, and the state has made possible marriage of the state instead of men, right? It's the same problem. And so what's happened, of course, is that women have all the benefits and none of the responsibilities and costs. And men are like, well, okay, well, the difference for men is we're just starting to check out. It's like, okay, fine. Because what do we need? We need
less.
We need a lot less. Right? Why? Because we're happy with beer and meat and fire and tools and farting, right? I mean, and jokes, right? I mean, and we're really happy if our occupation is warfare, raping, looting, and pillaging, right? So if you want men to return, if women think they're going to return to their natural state without men returning to their natural state, you're going to end up with something way closer to Islam or worse in the end, because that's what happens in low trust societies. There's no investment in the commons. But women can't believe, you can't reason with women because they don't reason by cause and consequence or reality, correspondence to reality. They are only reason by what's desirable or undesirable. And even if they agree with you that this is the outcome, they won't behave in that manner, because they will always seize the near opportunity for responsibility evasion, comfort, and consumption comfort over any durable contribution to the commons. In other words, women have to be exposed directly to risk, directly, not indirectly like men. We worry about stuff out in the future. Women have to be exposed directly to risk in order for their behavior to extend in time, their preference to extend in time, which is why children are the only means that appears to be of maturing women, because it's right. It never goes away. It's right there in front of them all the time. So again, we go back to this. We're just fucking turd flinging monkeys that happen to talk. I mean, it's just fucking
anthropomorphized.
A few of us happen to raise above the status of turd flinging monkeys to develop sufficient knowledge and consciousness and consistency and correspondence that we're actually human, and we grant other people the same privilege of humanity, but despite the fact that they're barely domesticated animals. And it's exactly, so is that paternalism? If somebody says, well, that's misogyny. No, it's just fucking reality. I don't have any hatred in it. In my world, only a woman would be stupid enough to attribute emotional origin to what's basically a question of correspondence and consistency. I mean, you have to be, but any woman that says that is proving you right. I mean, it's fucking hysterical. You'd have to be that. It's not subhuman, immature, undeveloped. You have to be pretty undeveloped childish to even make the statement, because it's so illogical. I know, fucking insane. Why is this? Why? Can't you just? I want a beach, some umbrella drinks.
Right. Sorry, Curt.
Just so fucking exasperating. And the
But
problem
is
is an autistic kid is you only have consistency and correspondence. You don't have anything else. So you grow up in it. This world just makes no fucking sense because everybody's
right?
ridiculous, right? And
It's not making any sense.
and they don't like you because you're right. And you're like, well, what's wrong with me? Nothing.
Right?
Grasp of reality. And your grasp of reality is what it is. It's just not useful to most other people because
It doesn't,
they
and it's
don't have
not,
a grasp of reality.
their grasp of reality is latched to the social validation.
Correct. Well, I mean, they get their information from others, right? They look for invariance from others as a means of testing themselves in time, whereas we look for failures over time, right? Risks, failures, opportunities over time. And one of the things that happens, of course, this is actually an insight that's not obvious, is that if benefiting from social interaction is questionable or difficult, or you get a lot of rejection when you try, you will instead favor longer term outcomes. In other words, things that don't require cooperation and require
Right.
less pressure, less organizing force over time. So it's just a self-reinforcing thing. And so if you're socially whatever and you're a bit on the autistic side, it'll just force you, encourage you, provide the incentives for you to become basically more competent. Right. I mean, it's what happens to most men, right? And so you end up with this issue. The problem for Aspies is that there's a difference between innovators and leaders, or autistics, so we end up being good innovators but not bad leaders, and then we're frustrated because we can produce ideas. Now we have to sell them by finding a leader who can actually manufacture and distribute it. Yeah, you're right. The idea, which is it's actually this weird interaction of all those groups that moves the politics. Because I mean, basically most people's job is to create food and reproduce children in order to maximize the production of labor, right? But the production of labor enables you to lower costs enough that you can have elites. Elites are basically people who, I mean, in the sense I mean them, I don't mean natural elites. People who can think and think, right? And people who can organize at scale.
Right.
So it's just it's like we think we think bees are so interesting because they're specialized, and like, you don't get it. We just have more specializations, right? Because we do more adaptive things, but fundamentally there are 4 personality groupings and whatever, and great big IQ distribution and sex differences and genetic load differences, and we end up dividing where the bees can only divide up so much labor. We can end up dividing every bit of time space labor that we can even discover.
Right. Right. We occupy it. If there's an opportunity there, someone will occupy it.
We'll find a way to occupy it. And the more of us there are, the more opportunity to occupy. So this leads to the current problem of this masculinization of women is leading to the masculinization of women and the increase in cost by bringing people together in urban centers where the cost of children goes up, but the cost of opportunity goes down, right?
Right.
That's leading to population collapse everywhere at about the same rate. And so what's occurring is that we started out with this first time we got these sequence of agrarian, commercial, financial, scientific, industrial, technological, medical, and informational revolutions. We've had these relatively quickly, somewhat like we had them really quickly, the equivalents quickly in the Indo-European expansion by cultural innovation and the Mediterranean expansion by conceptual innovation. We have this is just scales, right? Culture is a very base of the pyramid. Then you have conceptual innovation. And then at the top we have scientific and technological and computational innovation. It's just a pyramid of complexity that arises up from the bottom to the top. And so we build one upon the other. So we've just had these revolutions really quickly in the modern world. Once we recovered from the Roman collapse and the Semitic destruction of the ancient world. So we came through this and we developed really, really quickly. But what happened is we were usually gated by Malthusian limits. So
Yes.
we would have an increase and then we would be poor again. But if you do that long enough, you eventually get the point where you can capture energy, which meant that we could capture energy faster than we could reproduce, right?
Yes.
That now what's happened is interesting is that so we had this great profitability come from that gap.
Yes.
Gap. But as soon as you fill the gap, of course, you hit the Malthusian limit again, right? And you basically make everybody poorer, which is what's happening. So what happens then is you become addicted to the cheap profits of selling to population increases, which is what we call growth, instead of selling to innovation increases, right? Which is while the population is maintaining the same. Did I make that clear? You can breed a lot of people and sell them stuff, right? Which is causing you to restore the Malthusian limit.
Right.
Or you can breed a ratio of people to your innovation level, your energy capture, and stay outside of the Malthusian limit. And then everybody will stay wealthy. Right. So what's happening now is we're getting to the problem of we've now built the entire world based on growth in order to save the world from poverty, right? We've built it on growth. But have we maintained the rate of scientific innovation necessary to maintain the rate of energy conversion necessary to maintain the rate of innovation necessary to maintain the rate of choices, quality of life, or the marginal difference necessary to maintain the incentive to maintain the polity? And what's happened, of course, is that we're having a population decline. What the fuck do we do now? Right? You can't depend on growth anymore. We ended intergenerational savings on the pretense of infinite growth, and now we've got to go back to intergenerational savings. Well, I mean, look at it this way: we stopped intergenerational savings. We spent all the money that would have been saved. Right? We blew up the population. We put the future into debt. So now we've got to eliminate the future debt. We've got to pay for the aged population we've produced, and we've got to restore intergenerational savings in about the same amount of time. Well, I mean, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen nicely.
That's where I was going. There's no polite way to end that cycle.
Well, I mean, and people talk about it like it's an opinion. Or it's just fucking physics.
I want to know I suffer from that myself.
So we're in for some hardship unless there are innovations. We come up with some innovations that make this possible. And what I argue is the post-war the primarily Jewish-led post-war anti-eugenics movement, which is understandable from their perspective, since the eugenics movement is what wanted them to be eliminated, has basically flipped the bit for a long time on the fundamental problem that the eugenics movement was the only way of preserving natural selection and the ratio between innovation and population, eliminating the Malthusian, in other words, eliminating the Malthusian trap. So now we're in, because of the post-war Jewish revolt against it and the female conspiracy against it to bring it about, we're sitting there in this position of, wow, we're going to have, instead of having a eugenics movement that was really gentle, we're going to have a really, really bad thing. And I'm not really sure how that's going to turn out. So, and I've been talking for an hour now on this subject.
I know. How about that?
Is that okay? I mean, I don't
It's
know.
okay with me. I
Okay.
thought it was quite interesting, to be honest with you. You did a good job making some very good arts. The the sad,
So we keep saying we need to invent a new economics. I'm like, good fucking luck. You're going to invent a new force of gravity, right? I mean, the Japanese the only one are doing it right. What the Japanese are doing, saying we did it. We're fucked. Let's deal with it. The way we do that is we keep our smart people producing robots, right? And we produce robots, and so we take advantage of the failure. In other words, they've spun the failure into an advantage. We're going to automate like hell, and it's actually going to turn out to be our long-term benefit because we'll have a smaller population, more automation, and we'll have avoided the Malthusian trap. Now, of course, you have the Asian problem of they have lower sex drive.
they're having a problem in Japan.
Problem anywhere in Asia where I mean, there's a price. I mean, let's be an absolutely obvious, painfully rude, apolitical asshole for a moment and say, neoteny, right, produces a decline in rate and depth of sexual maturity in order to buy agreeableness, cooperativeness, lower aggression, and higher agency. Okay, who's the least neotenous people on the planet? Africans. Who's the most neotenous people on the planet? East Asians. Okay, where are we? Well, you know, we're kind of interesting as we're nowhere near as far along as the East Asians are, right? And that wasn't true 15,000 years ago, but it's true now. Because Europeans were quite neotenous as Eastern European as East Asians before the agrarian expansion. Now, in between the East Asians and the Americans, excuse me, you have the East Asians, the Europeans, and now you have the Africans on the lower bound. In between, though, you have the Afro-Asiatics, which are basically the Arabs, right? And the South Eurasians, which includes the North Africans, the Iranics, and the Indians, right?
Mhm.
Yet the Indians are composed of two generations of people from the same area, during which there was a vast change in racial construction. So, despite the fact that both the dark Indians and the light Indians came out of what is today's the space we call Iranic, right? Iranic space. There are two generations, right? The two human generations in there. And so you have that distribution there. So, I mean, so the problem is we have a pretty broad spectrum of neotonic development. So if you want to ask why certain groups, the Arabs and the Jews, are more, have this weird sex thing and are more aggressive, that's because they're less neotenic. Right? I mean, it's really, like I said, we need the 10 more years of genetics, right? Maybe 15 before I can say, see, it's these 15. All right. Right now I can see it in the data, but I can't see it in the genes. Right. But it's got to be in the genes because the behavior is too universal. So you have sexual differences. So the problem for the East Asians is going to be a pretty serious problem, which is they've actually exceeded neotenic evolution to the point
Out of the limits.
they've exceeded the limit of neotenic evolution where there needs to be incentive to reproduce because they actually have lower. And that's also the weird thing they have for young girls is really fucking, that we find extremely creepy, would be obvious actually in retrospect. Anyway, so how did I get on that fucking thread? Oh, I got on that thread by the problem of Japan actually did the right thing. They're most of the time, if Japan does it, they're probably right. And until recently, if Germany did it, they're probably right. And everybody else is probably wrong.
Oh my.
You know, it's just cultural.
The Germans.
Well,
I'm
and
just the failure of the Germans. That one hurt.
They'll just be a bunch of, what is that line from Predator? Bunch of slack jawed, faggots or whatever. I mean, that's what Germany's been pussified. I'll get out of it. They're German. I feel like, it's really offensive to say that the degree of sexual demand and aggression is covered by the spectrum of races, which covers the rate of the races reflect the distance and neoteny because of isolation events, right?
Right.
It's not fucking hard. And then you add the brutality of agrarianism and cold weather to it, and you're going to get Europeans and East Asians. And when you realize that the center can't do that because the land is unfit for it, it's fucking cold or hot, they couldn't go through those selection processes. So, anyways, it really offensive. I think what I said is probably really offensive to people because it says genetic determinism, and I'm like, yeah, genetic determinism. Well, I mean, at scale, it's genetic determinism. You take 140 IQ Nigerian, 140 IQ German, and 140 IQ Hindu, and 140 IQ Japanese, and you're gonna see that they all think like 140 IQ people, but they all intuit by genetic differences, and you're going to see that fairly consistently if you have enough 140 IQ people to be able to overcome the fact that you get some Africans who are incredibly compliant and some East Asians that are completely aggressive. But if you look at the distribution, now this number doesn't show up in personality tests as dramatically as you'd think. I mean, Africans are more pro-social, right? You're going to find that, right? But you can see it in bodies of the population. Right? You can observe it in the bodies of the population.
Yep.
What am I getting on to? I'm just trying to get to where it's going to be. We've really fucked up in the post-war period.
Mistakes were made.
Oh my God. You can't say the Nazis were right. What you can say is that the ethno-nationalist movement, right? The ethno-nationalist movement for the restoration of aristocratic values, even under authoritarian statism, was more correct than the attempted regression of the communist socialist French, right? Marxist, neo-Marxist. You can say, well, regardless of what we think or what we like, the fact that the science is that the fascism is the wrong term, but it's basically rule of law, ethno-nationalism of small states is the optimum political order, and everything else, especially anything that's global and desire, is pretty fucking evil. Okay, more than an hour on that rant. It's probably some pretty good value in there.
That was high value arcs there for the public. So do you want to break?
Yeah, I want to break.
We can get some more coffee.
Yeah, are we going to pause? Or are we going to break?
Well, it's up to you how you want to do it, because I think we go into a working session. And
yeah, so let's just break this one.
Yeah.
Do your like, subscribe thing.
Do please hit like, subscribe, notification bell, leave the messages, and don't forget to be generous and go to the website of the Institute and think of contributing.
All right. Thank you very much, all. Hope you found that rant pretty useful. I'm just surprised my faculties keep returning, because I've been kind of celebrating this of late, and I can make long chains of reasoning again, which are without effort, which is kind of joyous. Anyway, love you all.
Thank you, Curt.